They say you never truly know someone until the masks come off. At 85, Hollywood icon James Garner shattered decades of silence, revealing a truth he had kept locked away, a truth not about fame, fortune, or power games, but about a woman the world thought they knew, the beloved Doris Day. Behind the golden glow of her image lay a story only Garner could tell, and it's nothing like the fairy tale the world believed. And what James Garner finally revealed about Doris Day stunned even his closest friends. In the early 1960s, Garner and Day lit up the silver screen like no other duo. Their sharp comedic timing, flirtatious banter, and magnetic on-screen chemistry in classics like The Thrill of It All and Move Over Darling made audiences believe they were the perfect romantic pair. To the public, they were the embodiment of glamour, charm, and effortless connection, the kind of pairing Hollywood only dreams of. But behind the cameras, the reality told a very different story. While the world adored their smiles and sparkling exchanges, some crew members whispered that the warmth you saw on screen didn't always extend off-set. Garner, a man known for being low-maintenance, brutally honest, and uninterested in Hollywood politics, often clashed with the more guarded and image-conscious Doris Day. Beneath the laughter and light-hearted scenes, there were moments of tension, moments the cameras never captured, but those who were there never forgot. Doris Day was the embodiment of America's sweetheart, her radiant smile and wholesome charm carefully crafted by the Hollywood studio machine. But according to James Garner, that immaculate image didn't always reflect the woman he knew behind the scenes. They came from completely different worlds in the industry. Garner, the rugged, no-nonsense television star turned leading man, and Day, the meticulously polished box office darling, burdened with the pressure of always appearing perfect. Their first collaboration, The Thrill of It All, was a runaway commercial success, cementing their place as one of Hollywood's most bankable on-screen couples. Yet, behind the glowing reviews and box office numbers, Garner felt the experience was far from thrilling. Years later, when interviewers brought up Day, he would smile politely, offering only vague, carefully measured compliments. But in his private journals, a far more candid side emerged. He recorded moments on set that left him frustrated, instances where Day's calculated charm felt less like genuine warmth and more like a performance. To Garner, it wasn't just about clashing personalities, it was about the uneasy truth that the Doris Day the world adored might not have been the Doris Day he really knew. One particularly revealing entry from that era states, "She knows how to get what she wants, and she knows when to act innocent." That is the perilous aspect. This single line illustrates a far more intricate narrative than what Hollywood attempted to portray during press tours and promotional images. Even more telling is how frequently Garner revisited the topic of Day in his writings, suggesting that their working relationship left a mark much deeper than he was willing to acknowledge. Studio executives, always mindful of public perception, embraced the notion that Garner and Day shared a close friendship. They arranged for them to be photographed together off-set, crafted playful interviews, and leveraged their chemistry to boost ticket sales. For a time, this strategy proved effective. However, as the years passed, Garner's growing silence regarding Day became increasingly apparent. When co-stars and directors reminisced about working with her, Garner's name was noticeably missing from their narratives. He, in turn, seldom mentioned her unless asked, and even then, his compliments were brief and oddly detached. What exactly went awry between them? Why did a man who generally got along with nearly everyone in Hollywood become so distant when it came to Doris Day? Those close to him suggest it all started with a single day on set. A solitary moment that left Garner feeling blindsided and ultimately betrayed. What transpired during that moment would influence everything that followed. It was while filming Move Over Darling that events took a significant turn. James Garner, always the consummate professional, insisted on performing most of his own stunts. He had established a reputation as someone who was prepared to risk everything for a good take, and he felt it gave his performances more sincerity. However, one scene in particular tested that reputation to its breaking point and revealed a side of Doris Day that he would never forget. Garner had to execute a physical prank in the sequence that included a bathtub, a slick floor, and an awkward fall. It was standard slapstick romantic comedy on paper. It was actually far more deadly than anyone had thought. Garner dislocated his shoulder and tore ligaments when he slipped more forcefully than he meant to and landed awkwardly during the shot. The team hurried in. The cameras stopped. Production stopped. However, it was not the injury itself that stayed with Garner the most. It was the response of Doris Day. Day little moved, according to several set reports. As crew members fumbled about the fallen actor, she stood there aloof and unconcerned. She turned away, according to some. According to others, she only watched with a gaze that Garner would later characterize as aloof. Garner was surprised, but no one knew for certain what she was thinking at the time. He said he was expecting a quick check-in, a sign of care, or something, but it never materialized. Garner described the incident with remarkable clarity later in his autobiography. Pained and unable to move my shoulder, I lay on the floor. And I recall Doris simply standing there when I looked up. There was no response, no worry, nothing in her eyes. Words could never express how much that told me. More than any gossip column or tabloid story, that sentence demonstrated the extent of the hurt. Years later, Day was questioned about the incident in interviews. As usual, she dismissed it with a laugh, claiming that Garner was a tough person. Garner, however, never shrugged it off. He needed physical therapy for months after missing a few days of filming. Eventually, his body's pain subsided. However, he claims that the injury to his pride, and, more significantly, to his opinion of Doris Day, never materialized. According to several insiders, she froze in the moment since she was so overwhelmed that day. Others surmised that she was simply trying to get through the day since she was annoyed by the long hours. But it was something else, something colder, Garner thought. He sensed she didn't view the situation as a crisis, but rather as an annoyance. And there was no turning back once he came to that conclusion. They interacted politely but cautiously after that day. For the cameras, the warmth that viewers trusted was meticulously preserved. However, there was a noticeable gap between them as the director shouted, "Cut." Garner, who had always taken great satisfaction in being a pleasure to deal with, started to distance himself. And even though he never spoke to her directly about it, he remembered that quiet for many years. It marked a sea change in Garner's perspective on Day as a person as well as in their working relationship. He would subsequently claim that the incident taught him exactly who she was, despite the fact that he never made a big deal out of it or started a contentious interview. And from then on, that belief would inform every choice he made in relation to her. Following the triumph of their initial two collaborations, studios were keen to reunite James Garner and Doris Day. The public adored them. Their combined names virtually assured a hit, and the movie office results confirmed it. However, one eagerly awaited project would never be completed. Additionally, what transpired behind the scenes caused a rift between them that never went away. Production was underway and Garner had already signed on when it was announced that Doris Day had abruptly left. Garner was caught off guard by the sudden and silent withdrawal, which came with no prior notice or explanation. According to reports, he had pushed Day for the part because he thought their previous connection would help the movie succeed again. There was more to her abrupt departure than a scheduling conflict. It was intimate. According to production insiders, Garner was furious. He was embarrassed that someone he believed he could at least depend on professionally had let him down. To make matters worse, there were allegations that Day had signed a secret contract with a different studio for a solo movie that conflicted with the one Garner had agreed to. The outcome was the same whether it was an effort to avoid working with him again or a greater salary. The bag was left in Garner's grasp. He eventually acknowledged that the quiet was what hurt the most. There was no phone call, no apology, no explanation, just a silent departure as though the movie and his participation were completely pointless. According to his friends, he took the relocation personally and saw it as a clear indication that they no longer wanted to interact with him. Garner allegedly started rejecting scripts with her name on them after that. That was not something he wanted to experience again. None of this was known to the public for years. The press cited creative disputes as the reason for the film's covert cancellation. The fallout, however, was serious behind the scenes. Garner distanced himself even more from Day. Furthermore, although he maintained his grace in public, his private remarks revealed a quite different picture. Decades later, Garner gave a succinct and direct answer when asked if he would ever collaborate with her again. "It was enough once." From a man who rarely used absolutes, it was a loaded response. And the moment of no return was marked by that wordless rejection. Doris Day's autobiography, a glossy, best-selling memoir that depicted her life in gentle pastels, was published in 1976. Its sweetness and vulnerability were acclaimed by fans, and for many, it was the closest they had ever been to meeting the genuine Doris. She talked about her difficult marriages, her upbringing, and the demands of celebrity. Although its content was selected, its tone was open. In James Garner's opinion, the book stated more about what it omitted than what it disclosed. Day just made a fleeting reference to Garner in his more over 300 pages, saying a few complimentary things about how great he was to work with. No shared memories, no stories, no indication of their underlying bond or tension from the past. The omission was startling to someone who co-starred with her in two of her most popular movies, and it felt like a purposeful erasure to Garner. In private, he was angry. He had anticipated that the years they spent together on set, the highs and lows, and everything in between, would at least be acknowledged to some extent. Instead, he seemed to have been completely removed from her story. According to those close to him, he felt insulted and even made fun of for the lack of space she gave him. She was now but a footnote to a man who had been instrumental in two of her most famous performances. The book was full of fond memories of other co-stars, which, in Garner's opinion, made it worse. Cary Grant, Rock Hudson, and even a few lesser-known actors who had only collaborated with her once. Garner wasn't simply left out. That very absence was what picked him apart. It was more than what she didn't say. Instead, it was about whom she decided to speak. Garner appreciated honesty, but he wasn't one to seek attention. He thought that rather than focusing only on the bits that made someone appear good, stories should be conveyed in all their messiness. According to him, Day's memoir was meticulously chosen, molded to maintain a public persona that left little space for uncomfortable realities. By subtly deleting the passages that did not match her meticulously crafted portrayal, she had, in his opinion, taken charge of the story. In contrast, Garner wrote a chapter on his time working with Day in his own memoirs, which was published years later. It was brutally honest, but not bitter. Although he stated their relationship off-camera was tense, courteous, and primarily professional, he described their on-screen chemistry as genuine. He noted that when they were alone together, he never really understood her and that something always felt a little off. There was only unresolved tension that hung there like an unanswered question, not malice. The glaring disparity between their two narratives only served to widen the gap. As her book was being hailed by her supporters, Garner's remarks came as a sudden and unnerving clap. It was perceived by some as a last jab. Others regarded it as a man who, after years of maintaining appearances, was finally speaking the truth. However, it was more than that to those who understood how he had carried that quiet for decades. It was genuine closure, although a little late. And it was obvious to those who could read between the lines. Doris Day, Garner thought, had changed history and excluded him. Furthermore, it was impossible to go back after history had been altered. Silence frequently spoke louder than scandal in vintage Hollywood. Additionally, the silence of their common acquaintances in the instance of James Garner and Doris Day spoke for itself. It was uncommon for directors, producers, and actors who had collaborated with both stars to discuss their relationship. It was more than just a matter of deference. The reason for this was that no one wanted to become involved in something they did not fully comprehend. One of Day's best friends, Rock Hudson, was especially silent whenever Garner's name was mentioned. He was frequently seen as the link between their two worlds and had worked with both stars, but he never provided an explanation for what went wrong. Only rumors were stoked by that silence. Some others thought Hudson knew more than he disclosed, particularly about off-camera conflicts that were never reported by the tabloids. Others in Day's group did the same. When reminiscing, directors who had worked on her films praised her warmth and charm in glowing remarks, neatly excluding Garner. Garner, who is renowned for his candor, decided to exercise restraint. That was telling enough on its own. His tone changed with Doris, but he would say what he wanted about almost everyone else in Hollywood. Yes, there was frustration, but there was also something more substantial. Sadness, perhaps even disappointment. Rumors began to circulate over time. Some conjectured that the conflict between Garner and Day might have stemmed from more than just a lost relationship, a hidden disagreement, a broken promise, or a professional falling out. Even years after they had ceased collaborating, people close to both stars acknowledged that the energy connecting them was complex, though no one could be sure. The manner that Day was still observed in Hollywood was another factor that contributed to the mystery. As one of the last great icons of a bygone period, she received several honors and accolades. Garner never voiced his disapproval in public, but according to sources, he was annoyed by how she seemed to get away with it. According to one of Garner's friends, she could charm the world. However, Jim never recovered from that charm. Day was untouchable in the court of popular opinion. Meanwhile, Garner was burdened by an unsolved past that no one wanted to discuss. He also never let go of the sense that something significant had been left unsaid between them, even though he never attempted to break her down. And until the very end, there would be stillness. James Garner remained a renowned Hollywood figure over the years, quiet in retirement, graceful in aging, and adored by admirers who recalled him as a leading man who never followed the rules. He mostly avoided the limelight, preferring to spend his final years in seclusion. However, Garner finally addressed the one name that had plagued his legacy for decades at the age of 85 in an interview that few anticipated and even fewer were ready for. Day, Doris. It was not intended to be a confessional interview. It started off as a retrospective, a look back at a career filled with legend. However, the interviewer brought up Day almost casually as the topic shifted to the heyday of romantic films. Garner was silent for a moment. He then let out a sigh and spoke in a way that would surprise even his closest friends and family. "I never really let her go." It wasn't an angry statement. It was silent, introspective, and almost depressing. According to Garner, forgiveness had never been about the eraser from her memoir, the cancelled movie, or even the on-set injury. It was a betrayal of trust, something more profound. He claimed that she was aware of what she did, but she never acknowledged it, not even in a phone call or a single word. He acknowledged that he had harbored the bitterness for longer than necessary and that it had persisted due to disappointment rather than hatred. He said we had an opportunity to be something amazing. Perhaps even off it, not just on the screen. But I was never able to find out why she shut that door. The interviewer was caught off guard by the confession. This was not the flaming fight journalists love to dramatize, nor was it the usual Hollywood resentment. It was something quieter and colder, a wound that had never healed because its perpetrator had never admitted its existence. Garner's words stirred feelings among enthusiasts and fellow actors. A few defended Day, insisting she ought to have had her reasons. Others empathized with Garner's feel of abandonment, spotting, in his phrases, an entire life of holding lower back. However, the confession turned into never supposed to start a struggle. It was truly a person nearing the give-up of his life, telling the fact as he noticed it. He ended the subject with a sentence that lingered inside the air lengthy after the interview ended. "Every so often those who hurt you the most are those you least expect." And by then it becomes some distance too late for both of them to restore it. Whilst Doris Day exceeded away in 2019, tributes poured in from everywhere in the global. She changed into remembered as a radiant megastar, a undying voice, and a beacon of Hollywood's golden age. Her dying brought a wave of nostalgia and reverence. However, for James Garner, who had handed only some years in advance, it left in the back of an unfinished story that would in no way be resolved. Garner's confession, although quiet, had solid a new light on their legacy. Fanatics began to re-watch their movies, attempting to find diffused symptoms of anxiety, wondering what had virtually occurred at the back of the one's playful smiles and ideal comedic timing. But whatever had existed between them, hurt, misunderstanding, resentment died with them. There could be no apology, no letter unearthed, no last-minute reconciliation. The door became closed forever. Within the years, on the grounds that, biographers and film historians have tried to piece collectively what went incorrect. A few believe the rift turned into expert, rooted in clashing personalities and unstated egos. Others assume it become private, perhaps even romantic, something extra prone that neither superstar ever wanted to talk about publicly, however the reality stays elusive. Doris Day in no way addressed Garner's later remarks. It's far uncertain whether she ever even heard them. She had grown famously private in her later years, rarely giving interviews and focusing mostly on her animal advocacy work. By the time Garner in the end opened up, she had already faded from public lifestyles. If she had regrets, she in no way voiced them. And so, the thriller stays. Two of Hollywood's brightest stars, forever linked by using classic movies and many years of speculation, left at the back of a legacy as superb as it's far incomplete. Their chemistry on display screen changed into actual. That a good deal no one doubts. However, the distance behind the scenes tells a more haunting story of ignored chances, wounded pleasure, and a silence that spoke louder than any script. In the end, perhaps it changed into not approximately blame. Perhaps it turned into about human beings formed by means of an enterprise that demanded perfection, pressured smiles, and silence in the face of pain. What they shared on display screen added joy to hundreds of thousands. However, what they left unsaid tells a completely different tale, one that can by no means clearly be understood. And perhaps this is the most human a part of all.